feminine force is gentle, is peaceable. It demands the purity, meaning like it's almost like, hey, you can't be with no other girls. But we'll say girls just means any other distractions, any other things. You can't be with no other girls but me as I go through this process with you and you gain this wisdom. You see what I mean? So this is in that way, a gentle and a peaceable spirit that takes one through having a counselor, something that 3 a.m. it's already going in, tumbling the last wheel of what was already being brought forth as the next level of your learning. What I feel like is when one doesn't have that activation of that feminine side, the wheels don't turn that way. There be something else talking, and we would discuss this. They set up altars in the mind, the whisperer and the language complex, etc. It'd be something else talking, but it's not that divine voice that actually is leading one to their true north, leading one through that process that they need to go through. So it's a mother and a father. That's why you look at the Mommy Waka books, right? And, they show, when they show the sister, especially when you go further into the book, they show you like Dionysus is the cognate of one of the Sibyllines. But that doesn't mean she was going to come in a size 6, looking like Wonder Woman, so that a lot of times even the vision of the ancient mothers, a hippopotamus is the most dangerous, you know what I mean? But you may look at it and be like, I think the lion. No, but it's so what I'm getting at here is that the forces in themselves, they try and they test you for how much not you say you really believe in them or you connect with them, but how much that you actually do connect with them and make that effort. And I haven't seen any person that made that effort that didn't get an answer. And so I feel like that, that's absolutely special because all of this interference with the next thing that's in front of your face saying, hey, I'm God. I believe that's a natural trial that we all have to go through and pass at some stage in our journey. Right. And so I'm not really, I often go back and forth in my own mind about, when you give advanced levels of knowledge, in many ways, you're preventing a person from doing things that maybe otherwise they would have done, right? You're giving them wisdom so that they avoid some disaster. This is what your parents do. I encourage us always to keep doing that because in many ways, the person is still going to have to make the decision themselves, choose if they really even want to do it or not, or when they want to do it. So there's still a lot more decision making that goes on, despite that you can tell the person exact knowledge and wisdom of what is happening here in the planet. It's no different than when our mothers was telling us, hey, don't go out and do this, and hang out with him. And then the next thing we was out with him. You see what I mean? That's a big part of how this is all structured. It's still everything that's happening. We're witnessing in the family structure and what goes on even in our lives. When you say, hey, that rebellious son, man, I can't even say that I was definitely not the rebellious son at some point. I wanted to get out the house. So all these archetypes are still built into the family structure and still actually happening to cause and effect within the world. And we have to also pay attention to, just to that and what roles these things play in that scheme of things.
I want to ask y'all. First of all, shout out to everybody. We got about 4,200 people in the chat. Shout out to everybody in the chat. It's one of them shows. It's a historical show. It's groundbreaking. This is something that people didn't even see coming. You know what I'm saying? But, Radiohead Rich, I'm tuning the frequencies. They said, I talked to 7. Listen, I was scheduled to do a show with 7, just with 7. Then I was on the phone with Rod or something happened with Rod. I'm like, wait a minute. I said, wait a minute. Maybe I should get Rod and 7 together. Because Rod talks about 7. Rod be like, yeah, shout out to 7, blah, 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 blah. I said, wait a minute. Maybe I should get Rod and 7 together on the show. So I asked her, I said, 7, you cool with it? 7 said, hell yeah. Let's go. Let's get it. I'm ready. So that's how it happened. But legendary. Oh man, amazing show so far. We just passed the hour mark. We're gonna go to the next hour. We're gonna keep it moving to the next hour. Let me ask y'all this, all right? We're talking about the divine feminine, and I started thinking about ancient civilizations. I thought about, when our ancestors were strictly telepathic, no speech, right? Now, I'm saying that to say, let me just preface that. We know we know if we could compare it to what we've been through in this realm on this time, we know when the text messages came around, we know when the cell phones came around, things that was in our head, the way we used to communicate with people changed. The communication got lost. We're not close with people like we used to be. When we had to make phone calls and we had to see them, or we had to remember phone call or phone numbers and things that we have a reference points. Oh shit changed when text messages came out, when cell phones came around. We have a reference point. In terms of telepathic civilizations, I'm guessing that's when all this shit went astray, when things changed, when we're talking about all this rebellion and everything, is when we started using language, because one of the main purposes of language, people use that shit to lie. We lie like a motherfucker. We lie to ourselves, we lie to each other, we lie to family, we lie to friends, we just lie. But you have to be intuitive to know what's the intention behind somebody's language. So what I'm asking you with that being said, around what time period? Because I'm trying to track this, just like I could track around 2000 text messaging came around and cell phones came around 1999, 2000. What civilization did we go from telepathic to communication with our mouth? Because maybe that's when we could track. Oh, that's when the shit went from the divine feminine. That's when motherfuckers started lying and rebellion against all the internal, spiritual, intuitive senses that we once had. When did this split happen between telepathy and the spoken word?
You remember when Seven was talking about the language of the women that they didn't let the men speak?
Yeah.
Just the language.
What, telepathic?
Yeah. The women got a network. And the network is predicated upon the frequency on mitochondria. They all psychically connected. And that's why a lot of them, they don't know what's going on. They end up in psych hospitals because they hearing all of the women chattering on the psychic channel. Shit. And they think they crazy. Yeah. Right? It's part of the symbols. When you understand that the symbols used to be able to consciously telepathically talk to each other, the symbols became the priestesses of the Delphi, or the oracles of the Delphi, right? And before that, though, they was the goddesses in ancient Kemet. They was the great Inanna and the Rishkagal, etc. in Sumer. But the usurping of the divine feminine is the cause of the last ice age. This is what caused us to go through the ice age. That was a nuclear winter from a nuclear holocaust. And there was a Anunnaki war. It's in a book called the Vamanas Wars in India. Then the Vamana Sutras is what the name of it is. And they tell you about the crafts that was fighting back then. Right? They talk about it in the Sumerian tablets as well. And then they tell you in a lot of fictional stories about the Anunnaki, key bits of truth sprinkled through a fictional narrative.
Mm-hmm. I was just showing the epic attributes here because it's breaking down some of those conflicts, but even also putting in space that the Great Mother was the one who formulated even the first humans, mixing them with the God and with the beings that are here on earth, as far as this coming from the text. And, continuously expressing that the schism, as our brother is saying, the schism that's continuing to happen is because there is still a conflict, if you may, for the throne of consciousness.
Indeed. Yeah. This is some powerful stuff, family. I want to ask now. let me put my camera back on. I'm loving your references as Rod is talking. This is what's powerful. As Rod is talking, Seven's coming up with these images, and it's like a documentary. Like Rod's talking, and we see these ancient images. Like, this is good stuff. What you got there, Seven?
It's a real time documentary too, because
oh yeah.
I just want to point out also that I still find it kind of fascinating that humanity thinks that when it finally finds, let's say, these beings you know, 'cause they got it now slated that God's going to show up, I guess, in some spacecraft, or he's just going to part the clouds, that it's actually going to look like the 3D version of the human now, which I think is a gross mistake, especially with what has already been uncovered in Angkor Wat, and how the temples in Angkor Wat are pointed to Draco, while the temples in the pyramids, of course, we have pyramids pointed towards Orion. But you're seeing amphibians and you're seeing reptilians. You're seeing humans with like the holes that, you know, that lizards have and snakes have on the side. You know, you're seeing breasts, you're seeing elongated heads. And, you know, so basically what I'm saying is, from the accounts, when you go back to quote unquote, you keep going down those ancestral lines, you get really fast into these more of what we would say is first, what they say, the first strand of the DNA, the genetics of the reptilian strand, which they still use. And Rod could break this down because he's studying this genetics, but they use this reptilian DNA even to this very day when they're building a DNA stack. They go to that first reptilian zygote and they start constructing from there. And so, you know, it's really, you know, that's why, you know, the mind has to also be very broad, because this kind of system, and this is like, we're seeing something that looks our size. There's so many accounts, even of the ones in Britain and London being giants. And so when we even put a larger pineal gland, we, like I said, we remove, like Rich saying, we remove phones, and even we remove languages. We have beings that are always tapped into that all there is, because there is no distraction. And, you know, one of the things that was pointed out was how the gods, you know, kind of got a little perturbed of all the noise coming from the humans. And this is, you know, marked in some of the Sumerian texts. Some insight said that was because when the humans start to think things that were outside of even what the quote unquote supreme beings, gods, would be thinking, this was noisy, because we were all tied into the same wavelength. But even the ideas of the males, as it was saying, and just so everybody understands, from the Dogon tradition, it's noted that anytime they went through the birthing process, they birthed in perfection. They made sure that, hey, this being is coming out balanced, or else they removed the being. And that may seem very cruel to you, but since, you know, there's that side and this side, if something comes out over here and it's not perfected, they seen that as a failed experiment. So in many ways, the way that the male is configured is seen by the ancient matriarchs as being somewhat of a disfigurement, not somewhat, but a disfigurement within the genome, right? So the males were in that way not necessarily shined upon anyway as being the most powerful. That wasn't the role. And so I believe Dan still kind of gets this story better than most. And this, of course, is Dan Winter, is to explain again how even the Asa Uru and the Anunnaki begin to move away from the hive that they were connected into. Because all we've been talking about is that, hey, all these beings are on the same wavelength. When you get to the next level, you're on the same wavelength. But that same wavelength is also what we would even seem to call instinct, what we would even seem to call the hive at times. But this wavelength will also always keep you in balance as we're moving through whatever we're moving through. But there were many who desired to remove themselves from that, to basically cut their umbilical cord, right? And so we find again that the rebellious son did go a bit further with its own world and setting up, because it has a certain level of power. But that power is like half magic. It's like the reason why the sun is not out 24 hours a day, and the reason why we have this quote unquote distortion, imperfection, evil, etc. Versus there's no sunset for the sun. You know what I mean? It's always, if you was on it, because it looked like a boat when you open the third eye and you look at it, it looks like it's moving and everything is going with it, and you're being left in the land, the darkness, if you may, when you see it with the third eye. And so it's more of like, hey, are you going to join in with this everlasting, which is why the love frequency, it's like, it's still a choice. You could love or hate. And you got people really hating. And you can see how ignorant that is. Cause like, man, wouldn't you want to love? Right. But it also lets you know how deep the game is, because even the things that would seem like common sense, like, yo, lift each other up instead of breaking each other down. Yo, stop assassinating everybody, giving them a life sentence. Yo, give them stop worrying and fighting. All those things are not as common. And so thus, I feel like that this is also a place, because they equate it a lot with Sirius, and Sirius's other name is weight, right? And it kind of even lets us know, because we get the scales and we get even a planet called weight, or a celestial body called weight, that balancing out in these kind of things is very important to the ancestors. Judging righteously and this kind of thing is very important to the ancestors. So it's almost like everything that we go through and everything that we experience, what we get from it will be what we earned. And there will be like no cheating or no other way. And, you may even see rich people, but then if you could be inside of their mind, you would see that they're living in the greatest level of terror. There's a whole veil over them. They can't see anything. If you time traveled in the mind of somebody rich, you probably would be stuck in their mind because you wouldn't have enough knowledge to figure out how to get out of them. You see what I mean? So there's so many things that are happening inside of the space. And then there's even more things happening inside of us. And the only one that we really have the most control over is this one. And so the lesson here, even for every being, woman and man, because, woman is also here, but woman has another part to gain to her too. That's a whole nother story. But it's like we all have this process of we either inherit the gift, which was already given. We were already given the life. Now we're going through the lesson. If we're going to do this again, like somebody say, hey, we come back. The jury to me is still out on that. I feel like sometimes when you look at DNA and all this stuff, it seems like almost like a roll of the dice. And if you could get into a life where you can at least comprehend what is going on and you can even see what you need to do for your body, and this makes sense, it's like seize that life. Don't wait until like, oh, well, maybe I'll come back on the next life and then, or maybe when I leave out of here, they all have me. And it's like really make that effort so that way you're just going above and beyond. I just wanted to, just add that in because, when we really push ourselves to go above and beyond, we actually see all of these connections. We see all these masters and teachers. And, if we push ourselves into that direction of where we're failing all the lessons, we get a chance to also see how low this thing really goes. And it doesn't appear that there's a bottom or a top to it as far as where you can end up. Right. So, yeah.
And I want to go this direction with everything that's been said so far. And I know Seven's going to love this question because he's into AI. So I know he's going to love this question. I've had this talk with I had a talk with Robert Edward Grant. I had to talk with Robert Edward Grant about this, and I might have mentioned this to Rod Hayes because me and Rod have done several shows about radio heads and all this type of stuff. And I think personally, this is what I think, and I want to get y'all opinion on it. And I'll talk, like I said, I talked to Robert Grant about this. I think that it's a misnomer for us to say that we create reality. Why do I say that? And the reason why I bring that up, because that's one of the biggest phrases in the spiritual community. I create my reality. I create my reality. I create my reality. That's one of the biggest things we want to do down here is create our reality. I think it's a misnomer to say that. Why? I've said several ways. I explained it several ways, but I'm explaining the AI way now since I got Seven on here. So Seven, they just came out with Sora, right? And they got AI. You know Sora, right? And they use AI. Now, Sora and AI, in order to come up with a picture, they don't create it. They generate that picture from source material. They need source material. It's not like they just create it. You say it and they just come up with it. They generate that image from source material. So they're not creating it, they're generating an image from something that already exists. What I'm saying, Seven, is that we create reality from source material. I mean, we generate reality from source material. We don't just create it out the dim blues. It already exists. We're coming up with things that already exist, and we're generating an image from our brain through our eyes, and we're looking at it. So, in my opinion, Seven and Rod, when we say we create our reality, it causes stress on our ego because we think we got extra work to do. If we realize that the shit was already created and we just got to generate it from something that already exists, it eliminates a lot of stress. So I'm comparing what we do to AI. AI generates reality from source material. We generate reality from the source material that already exists in the quantum field. So talk to me about generating reality versus creating reality, which is the phrase we all use in the spiritual community.
So, you know, they talk about the collective unconscious, right? Where all of the minds are connected.
Yeah.
And the reality that we all agreeing on, go to the double slit experiment.
Mm-hmm.
The observer causes the wave to become a particle, which is the solidified three-dimensional expression of what you observe,
Mm-hmm.
right? Einstein called it spooky action at a distance when he noticed that creation was responding to the fact that he was the observer at the source of creation. And as he perceived it, it started to manifest and it confused him, right? Because this is where you get the concept that we all co-creators of this reality. We have expectations of what we are going to see. And the more unified the agreement to see that expectation manifest, the more likely you is to wake up to that new reality. This is why they say we co-creators with the creator. The generating from source material that AI does, it's just printing based on a set of codes. We are using what's called mind power to affect what's called prima matter, which the Egyptians called noon waters, the sacred waters of creation. And as we look into the water, like Narcissus, remember he looked into the water and fell in love with himself. That was all ego.
Mm.
So you said that thinking like this can damage the ego. That's the goal. Bust the ego so that the inner divinity can shine into the world. So you become your own individual sun. As you walk through the world, let that light in you shine in the world. That's what they're talking about. But you got to get past the ego. The ego is all built by the world around you. It's not the true self.
Mm-hmm.
Bust the ego upside the head, right? When you purify the ego in mysticism, you become enlightened by your higher self, assuming the driver's seat of the vehicle of the earth, the body. If the higher self is in control, you got access to higher self information that the lower self don't have access to. They call it psychic capabilities. And these psychic capabilities, when you understand how they work and begin to explain to you how we are co-creating with the creator, the creation that we creating in real time while we creating it. Right? So we are all source when we ain't in the physical body.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have egos or character archetypes that's designed to harness the energy in a specific fashion.
Exactly. You know what? I want to speak on that right there, Rod. Just right there. Even in a slightly different but the same way to put this,
Mm-hmm.
they always talk about how the reality is all made from the same thing, right? They just call it atoms.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But then you got different stuff in front of you. So you're like, well, if it's all made of the same thing, how do I have these different things? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And when we take that to a spiritual level from a creating, but really a co-creating level, because for sure the word creator is overused, like originating something. Remember, there's only one prima materia. And just like Rod is saying, what ego is good at doing is dividing everything.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Some the external ego as an like an external sun in a way of generating and separating. And there's always a new one. And you see what I mean? So this is also another way of seeing that, how still though, and this was just an experiment that was done linguistically that I had conducted, is seeing how many letters in the English language are actually the same as another letter in another language, like the B and the V in Spanish versus English.
Talk to me.
And when you start putting the language back together and you run all of these, or what I call the cipher, across every language, in the end, it'll tell you that based on this, there is only one word, or basically one sound. And you're wondering, well, how could that be? Because we have all these different tones and sounds that we got coming out of our mouths right now.
Right.
What we're missing is that, but we also assigned, and this is something that we're doing, let's say mentally or inside of our consciousness, we've assigned a marker or a tag to every single thing that we're coming in experience with in real time. And what Rod is mentioning is that when we tap out of that, then we enter into that space where it's clear to see not only are we the creators of the reality, but we're actually the reality. It's like there is no, you know, you click on the double slot experiment, you now become the observer and the observed in that way. And that's also what happens with spiritual journeys. That's also what happens when the third eye is open. You take the bufo, you blow way out of the body, you realize, oh man, I'm everything. And, you know, and that all goes on. And then, you know, at a certain point, you slam back down into the body, and that's proof. But we still also have to remember, you know, not to bag on the Christians, but they're still yet to experience something like this. What they think that they will have to wait until the end of life to experience, which is basically, you know, really seeing, yo, there's a spiritual plane is overlaying this one. It's alive more than this one, which makes this one more of an illusion. It's highly energetic. You walk outside, you see the trees moving, you see other, maybe something else in the Argyle, or the spaces in the spaces, basically a whole nother world. But then we come into the Matrix, and they ain't mention nothing about it. They still over here trying to figure out whether God is Santa Claus. You see what I mean? So it's a stark contrast, but it's to see these things like now, and that's why we call it word salad now, right? Because they can get on the Instagram and be like, yo, and we're creators, and you know, we're co-creating together, bringing in our vision and unity, and you know, they go in with the words, right? Because that's only one part of it, though, right? It's got the words got to connect with the heart. And so all of these, you know, these power languages, right? Because the power language is almost even like a symbolic Reiki. Once you speak the certain tone, it open up certain things in the reality. All depth level stuff, all grandma level. Don't sit on my couch, there's plastic. Don't talk when grown folks ain't talking to you. I'm gonna pop you in the mouth. Kind of deep level of things, right? You just sit and then you watch. And, you know, if you can, and then you learn. So all of that then starts evolving, involving, you know, that's why all of this physical reality stuff starts becoming petty. It starts being about what happens to generations over thousands of years, what happens with the migration of the souls and the merging of certain types of entities, you know, so it's all, let's say, higher level stuff. So on the lower levels, we have, let's say, this language, and they even pointed it out, Arabic and Hebrew, because you got to understand what they do Kabbalistically, right? But they're just like these derivative languages. One is used to handle the government. One is used to handle the lowest layer of the spiritual world. The priestcraft use one language, and then the gubernatorial uses another language, and then tries to manage the people through that language. We grew up in that system. Now, you know, we're coming into that awareness like, yo, there was something that existed even before all of this. And then that's when we start getting into, hey, I'm the creator of my reality. That's something that you don't just say, though. You, of course, step into that. And then you realize, now I know what I'm talking about. And it hit me the other night. It was simply saying this. Did you know how every aspect of what you deal with in the reality is generally momentarily, like stimulus? Like at every moment, you're feeling like, hey, I'm going to go in here and talk to my daughter. Hey, I'm going to go in here and get on the show. Or, hey, you know, even the 7 from 10 minutes ago is basically gone. Like that was momentary. Were we ever going to see that 7 again? You see me? So a lot of this stuff is, you know, when you really just meditate on it, all the same thing. And then that thought sometimes will send you into like this into a frequency where it's just all of a sudden like, you know what I mean? It'd be just like that. That's what we call the codes to the matrix, because you could just be sitting in something and then it'll hit you with like, hey, don't you see it's all impulses? It's all fleeting. So that makes it all the same thing. Nothing. And then from that point, the whole reality be gone and it feels good. You know what I mean? So this is, you know, that constant growth. So yeah.
But even get with this, right. So they became Skywalkers. They come down out of the trees, but they do it on their turn for ritual purposes.
as in they might come down for grounding rituals. I'm gonna go get some drink.
Oh yeah, hey, you dropping some juice, because I ain't never heard of the like I heard terms threw around like Skywalker this, Skywalker that, but I ain't never make a connection with there was some of our native tribes who actually went up in trees and started connecting these Skywalkers together and all their huts, and they make a lot of sense now. It's a whole bunch of shit just going on through my mind on other shit that I knew that I didn't put together about these people living up in these trees.
And that what we have been told or led to believe by mainstream media has been only there to confuse us, mislead us, and turn us on one another. So if we're going to ever get to a point of liberation, of freedom from all of this oppression, one thing we're going to have to do is get past jumping to assault each other openly and in public without cause, and no one's doing that to us. So what happens in the community is people begin to speak on things because it look a certain way. But if you understood the divide and conquer mechanism and how it works, you would know that the whole system is set up to turn us against each other. And when you start to mix the rules of the street with investigative reporting, you can ask the wrong questions that can get somebody severely hurt. And that's what made me bring up James Prince, because there was a situation similar to what young Pharaoh's doing with the nation in Farrakhan. He's not really understanding what he's doing, so I'm going to touch on some of it. But until I talk to certain people, I can't openly disclose a lot of information that I will be able to once I made those ends connect. So where we finna go with this is we're going to start with what happened with the J. Prince scenario. All right. A few months back, James Prince released a tweet when one of his people was robbed in New York. And he told the people in Brooklyn, or he asked them rather, if any of them knew who this was, if this was their people, and to sit down with him or, check on it so that they can get an understanding. And I heard several different YouTube channels ask if James Prince was snitching by putting that tweet out. So everybody in the streets, I'm not talking about music industry types, I'm not talking about businessmen, I'm talking about anyone who is in the streets that deal with day-to-day street life. They will understand that what J. Prince done was necessary. He had to address it publicly because the gentleman that did the robbery put it on social media publicly. If he doesn't say anything publicly about it and give the people who are the OGs in that area the opportunity to clean it up, then James Prince would not be following the rules. So what was James Prince doing? In the tweet, he basically told New York, specifically Brooklyn, where the guys that was from, that committed the act, and posted it on social media. Now, nobody had never heard of James Prince going out public and openly addressing the issues.